would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Hello YouTube! In honor of my first video, I figured I'd go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about what I'm about and about what the site is going to be about. I live in New York. I'm a political science major in college. I'm in my sophomore year, coming to the end of my sophomore year. And I can safely say that I'm pretty concerned about the direction the country is going in.
Hello everyone, welcome to my big video project, Content Nuke Kulinski. This took me months to do and it's finally ready and you're about to watch it. So let me go a little bit into why I made this. For anyone who doesn't know, and that's basically all of you, if this is your first ever video you've seen, I am someone who is really into politics. Like, really into politics. And it has basically become my top thing in life. It's probably my top interest. Most of my content covers it when I'm not covering movies or gaming or anything else. Most of it is discussing politics, and I think that's my life. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science in 2023. Why am I so into politics? All of it really does come down to one content creator, and his name is Kyle Kulinski, or as many of you know him as Secular Talk. In early 2008, on the early days of YouTube, Kyle would upload his very first video, and Kyle didn't know it at the time, but his venture into uploading political content would slowly but surely transform into one of the biggest political commentary channels on this website. It took almost a decade, but following the rise of Donald Trump in 2016, Kyle would become one of many to see their outlets rise into prominent careers. I began writing this in about February or so, and at that time, Kyle had amassed about 1.5 million subscribers. At the time I'm recording this, he is on his way to 2 million subscribers. He's single-handedly outpacing Vosh and Destiny combined. Along with this, he's amassed over 1 billion views during the entire span of his channel, which again, from 2008 to now, almost 2 decades. In my opinion, no other independent political commentator had as much meticulousness and charisma as Kyle did with Secular Talk. He was super well researched and had a perfect passion that really hit hard with his content. And because of this, even in heated debates with other content creators and people IRL where he was tested really sharply, he shined as a formidable figure, especially as a commentator on the online left. Something that was quite scarce, especially for me. You see, at the time that I started watching Secular Talk, which was around 2016 to 2017, when news media would be covering stuff about Trump getting 2 scoops of ice cream or walking in front of the Queen for 2 seconds and how that indicates that he's incredibly terrible, Kyle Kulinski had a very good way of criticizing him, such as his tax cut bill, where 83% of the gains of that went to the top 1%, and everyone under that had their taxes raised over 10 years. I didn't know that until I saw Kyle Kulinski. And other things, such as him gutting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or how his first drone strike as president killed a girl. This is something that was not talked about in the media, and these are things that were pretty bad, especially that last one, because he talks about being the anti-war president. So, because of this, I was able to find my political footing, and I consider myself to be kind of a social democrat. Basically, center-left leaning on the global scale. Now, Kyle Kulinski's content was a big step in that direction, because before that I was relatively, well, not as into politics, but I would say I was probably more libertarianish. it was a little bit different when I found Kyle Kulinski and actually learned a lot more. This guy was really, really well researched. And in my opinion, there was no one that even came quite close to what he had. But that was then, and this is now. And the Kyle Kulinski now is a much, much different person than the Kyle Kulinski of that era. In fact, he is so, so different, like far removed by many steps. And I think he's either gotten corrupted, or I think that enough time passed where maybe true colors showed. But I don't want to get ahead of myself because there's a lot to get into before we get into that level of hell. I think Kyle's downfall started uh, around March 2020, and I think Kyle's peak was late 19 to early 2020. You see, Kyle, being a very populist left commentator, was staunchly rooting for Bernie Sanders, and it seemed like the years of his content and doing political commentary were leading to Bernie Sanders winning the nomination and then becoming the president of the United States. A better timeline. Kyle was really enthusiastic. Secular Talk was doing really, really well at this point as well. Bernie Sanders had become the frontrunner of that primary. And after Bernie won Nevada on February 22, 2020, the race appeared, as Kyle said, to be Bernie Sanders versus that 1,991 delegates needed to secure the nomination outright.
There's no longer a race going on. There's no longer a race going on. The race is over. Now, the only race that's happening is Bernie versus that 50% threshold. That's it. That's it. So the question is, will Bernie Sanders have a plurality of the votes or a majority of the votes?
Bernie Sanders, Kyle Kulinski, and the online left in general, they were on top of the world. It was a great feeling. And then Super Tuesday happened. Joe Biden, with help from the centrist candidates dropping out, gained such a surge that he swept 10 out of 14 of those states, immediately shifting the primary from a Bernie advantage to a very clear Biden advantage that essentially just ended the primary, though it would take a few more weeks for him to pad that number to truly end that. And Kyle did not take this well. This fundamentally broke his spirit. And for the entire 2020 general election with Trump versus Biden, Kyle refused to endorse or vote for Joe Biden. But unlike in 2016, where Trump winning gave him sort of an outlet to build that little populist left advantage in the commentary space, Kyle was in a bit of a more awkward space. It was a narrow win for Biden, but he won that election, which basically cut Kyle out of the equation and put him in a really odd limbo. And because of this shift in power that resulted in that election, it put Kyle in a very odd predicament where I think even he was able to notice this because his subscriber count stagnated. And then it got worse. You see, because by the time July came around, Kyle found himself embroiled in a new battle. This was not one that he was quite happy to have to weigh into, but he was dragged into it. It was drama that climaxed between Jimmy Dore, Anna Kasparian, and Cenk Uygur, all three of which being his friends. Kyle attacked Jimmy Dore for his nuclear erratic behavior and criticized comments he made to Anna, which, yeah, they were pretty bad, and I honestly don't even think I can say here what he said, but if you probably know what he said, and if not, I mean, you're free to look it up. That guy is he's a couple steps removed. And because of this falling out that he had with them, this drama, and because he refused to fundamentally take a side, because to him, they were all in the wrong, Anna Kasparian for attacking him for what seemed to be policy disagreements, and Jimmy Dore attacking her in a very crude way, Kyle kind of tapered off in terms of favorability from them. He used to actually be in the network of the Young Turks, he's not anymore, and it's because of this. And this would change Kyle Kulinski. The online left circles that he'd hovered around had effectively scorned him at this point. It was clear that he'd reached the ceiling in this environment now that Bernie Sanders had lost that primary and Joe Biden was now president, which was not at all in his plans. And to once again grow his channel, he would need to fundamentally change both his commentary execution, as I'm later going to get into, and more interestingly, he would change his demographic outreach. But to really come full circle to this, to really come full circle to all of this, it needs to be understood that this change that Kyle made was not one that you would make naturally. It's one that you would clearly make if your one goal was getting more clicks on your videos. And it begged the question, did Kyle Kulinski care more about his message, or did Kyle Kulinski care more about getting views on his YouTube videos and gaining a larger following? What really mattered to Kyle? What were his principles? Well, it really seems like all along, Kyle Kulinski might not have had the clearest principles even from day one. And he's had a downward spiral the past few years, which have been, it's been incredibly concerning to look at. And it's left me not even recognizing the person that I used to watch on a daily basis, the person that got me into politics as a whole. It represented something really dark. And because of that, I've decided it's time to go nuclear. All right, everyone, welcome to the Kyle Crash Out Show. I got a wonderful show for you guys today. I have a little bit of poll denialism to do because that's just kind of what I have to do because I record for 2 hours every day. I'm going to make a bunch of takes about polls that have come out that are going to age badly within 5 days, but you're not going to notice because I do this every day, so you're going to forget within like probably honestly within by the time you're done with the video, you're going to have forgotten. Then I'm going to do a few takes where I give really smart analysis of the foreign policy decisions made by leaders. And then I'm gonna, I think I'm gonna have a little bit of tantrums when things I don't like happen, but I'm not gonna give like, clarification for why I'm so upset. Uh, Following that, I'm gonna make really bad election predictions every single year, and none of you are gonna notice it because we're all a cult here. And then what I'm gonna do after that is I'm gonna do some election denialism. That's really cool. I'm gonna deny every election that doesn't go my way, and I'm just gonna blame it on something. And again, I'm just gonna my source is gonna be some guy who's probably on crack for that as well. Then I'm probably going to make transphobic comments, and no one's gonna hold me accountable for that because I'm the Kyle Crash Out Show. Who's gonna hold me accountable for these things? And then after that, what I think I'll do is I'm gonna start saying a bunch of really questionable things that I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how the Secret Service hasn't come to my house yet and paid me a visit. Yeah, it's basically, the whole 9 yards and a bunch of other stuff, and I can't wait to get into it. This is once again, subscribe to me on Spotify, subscribe to me on YouTube, subscribe to me anywhere you can. I want my podcast to pass my wife's podcast, even though I have a podcast with my wife where I also say really weird stuff. It's just a whole thing I do, again. But before we do it, that I have to do this. No, every single show I do this. I have to take a nice hit from this vape here. This is the new fruity one that they have. Well, all right, so let's get started. Kyle Kulinski fancies himself as a good finger on the pulse person with a lot of credibility. But over time, you kind of start realizing that this isn't true, like, at all. consistently he uploads titles that are either misleading or they end up not being true. A good example of this actually came in 2021, just as a little snippet, where he made a video called Democrats Are Fucked. Now, he insinuated in this video that the 2022 midterms were going to be a red wave, and he was very confident in it. He named the video Democrats Are Fucked. Not Democrats are in trouble, not Democrats have a problem, not Democrats, are down in the polls to Republicans, which at the time they were in late 2021, it was quite a lot. No, he said Democrats are fucked, which means they're fucked. You can't get out of this. We all know how the 2022 midterms went. But if you want to see an example of him doing this before the Biden presidency, like in the Trump presidency, after the first Democratic primary debate, Joe Biden had a really bad performance. He was debating Kamala Harris. She's going to be relevant again, of course. And she really embarrassed him. That busing issue, he did not come out of that looking good. And after that, his poll numbers fell. But he was still the front runner. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, what did Kyle Kulinski think about that debate moment? What was his prognosis of where Joe Biden stood after that debate?
I will declare it right now. Biden's candidacy is over. It's dead in the water. He will not recover from this. And she just did a great job. Honestly, the moment that everybody's talking about today, and they will continue to talk about from this debate, is when Kamala Harris ended Joe Biden's career.
Yeah, well, it turns out Biden was not done, in fact. He was very, very far from done. But hey, maybe, that's an honest mistake. That was a really bad debate performance. Hey, maybe Kyle was a little too optimistic because he didn't like Biden. He's going to learn from that, right? As it turns out, Kyle would not learn from this. He would consistently make wrong prediction after wrong prediction in the 2020 Democratic primary, and this is not something that would really improve. It kind of speaks for itself as to why he was wrong following Super Tuesday, but he was very wrong even before that. He even predicted Kamala Harris would be a frontrunner through the end of the primary. That ended up aging poorly. He could not for a second just accept that maybe the 2020 Democratic primary electorate was just not as progressive as he wanted to believe. And none of this would show itself more clearly than when Kyle had an appearance in Politicon in 2019.
With all due respect, saying that 70% of Americans believe in Medicare for all is not true.
That's a poll.
Medicare for all is a good representative of this. Kyle really supports this, and by the way, I do too. But for Kyle, he refuses to accept that it isn't as popular as he thinks. According to Kyle, Medicare for All has a 70% approval in the United States. This just isn't true. It just isn't. But he uses this metric because one Data for Progress poll showed that it has a 70% approval. However, Data for Progress seems to have a little bit of a bias when it comes to polling things, such as clearly oversampling more left-leaning individuals, something that's going to be more important in a few minutes, by the way. In reality, Medicare for All tends to poll in the mid-40s, sometimes high 40s. What is popular is a government health insurance system that covers people who can't afford private healthcare, otherwise known as a public option, which Biden supported, but then he walked back on, or at least he just didn't implement it. Now, low popularity for something, if it is the correct stance to have, that's not a reason not to support that. I too support that, but I also recognize that public opinion is going to need to be worked on. And that's done by arguing for it vigorously in positive directions. Bernie Sanders possibly is the best advocate for this system in this way, and a lot of his policy proposals are more popular now than before 2016 because of the messaging he had. But for Kyle, he just denies it and acts as if it's popular.
Let me tell you the poll, and I'll tell you the poll, which is every poll that goes into the details of, well, how do you support it if you realize you have to give up your private insurance? The numbers go into the 30s.
And what happens when they say you can keep your doctor? What happens when they say you can keep your doctor? It goes back up to 50%.
Okay, so this is an odd defense. The poll by Data for Progress did not ask, hey, what happens if you get to keep your doctor after we asked you, oh, by the way, you're going to lose your private insurance? It never asked that. So he's basically just assuming that any lost support on that would be regained when there was never a question about that. Besides this, it's a weak response to say people would just keep their doctors. I mean, it's not even necessarily true. A system like this is going to need to address health resources. There's a reason why it's a lot harder than you think to get a universal healthcare system through. Kyle could explain how it could be funded, and this shouldn't be a reason to drop the fight, but rather why this needs to be worked on more and more. And guess what? Someone wrote the damn bill, as he said in that debate stage, Bernie Sanders. He has it all mapped out, and that's why he raised his popularity. Instead of, doing that and following the leader, Kyle just tries to argue that voters are all sold on these issues, which they're not. And this isn't the only thing he's going to do this on. Another example of his stubbornness comes when Joe Manchin was refusing to support Biden's Build Back Better plan, namely the part where it would go over $10 trillion. It would have been a reformative bill. It would have had many positive effects, but Joe Manchin happens to be a Democrat in the state that voted for Trump more than any other state did in 2020. So it kind of makes sense that he's going to stand against Biden on that big version of the bill. So when Joe Manchin was refusing to vote for that big version of the bill, Kyle spent a lot of time bashing him for it, rightfully so, but in a really weird direction. He tried to say that Joe Manchin was backstabbing West Virginia.
This was polling done by Data for Progress during the middle of the Build Back Better negotiations. A majority of West Virginia voters support the Build Back Better plan. This is the thing that Joe Manchin tanked. You're not a West Virginia Democrat. You know who a West Virginia Democrat is? Me.
So first of all, no, it's not, because again, Build Back Better polled just over break even. So what makes you think, if it's polling at almost a tie, that it's going to be popular in the state that Biden lost more than any other state in 2020? And again, it's a Data for Progress poll. Once again, a poll that has a lot of issues with oversampling voters who are more left-leaning. This is something that Kyle should be aware of, but he isn't, because it's convenient to pull up that poll, even though every other data that isn't biased in this way seems to paint a very, very different picture. It's okay to have a bias, but in this direction, it's a little bit strange. But okay, second off, Kyle Kulinski really insists that if Joe Manchin was just in his direction, if he was like him and supported the things he did, West Virginia voters would love Joe Manchin, and they don't right now. When the 2024 election began to roll around, following the midterms, Kyle was, of course, not too fond that Biden was once again running to be the Democratic nominee, which I don't think is something that is exclusive to him. I think that ended up being pretty much the entire country. So naturally, it made sense that Kyle wanted Democrats to have an actual primary. And I agree with that. I think that primaries should happen more and more, as I've stated in previous videos. I think that primaries are a good thing and you should vote in every primary. But Kyle took this in a very strange direction. He ended up supporting very vigorously, with all his heart, Marianne Williamson. So when the 2024 election began to roll around, following the midterms, Kyle was, of course, not too fond that Biden was once again running to be the Democratic nominee, which I don't think is something that is exclusive to him. I think that ended up being pretty much the entire country. So naturally, it made sense that Kyle wanted Democrats to have an actual primary. And I agree with that. I think that primaries should happen more and more, as I've stated in previous videos. I think that primaries are a good thing and you should vote in every primary. But Kyle took this in a very strange direction. He ended up supporting very vigorously, with all his heart, Marianne Williamson.
For those of you who are not familiar enough with her at this point, and I know most of you are in my audience, but she's the only candidate in the race supporting Medicare for all, free college, eliminating all student loan debt, higher minimum wage, and actually going to fight for it, getting money out of politics, ending the wars, cutting the military budget, raising taxes on the rich, actually helping working people, pro-union. It's the only candidate that takes those basic lefty positions. Basic lefty positions.
Okay, so this is fine. I mean, she's pretty progressive, and unlike Biden, she wasn't cognitively declining, so that's fine. She's fine. She's fine. There's nothing really wrong with Marianne Williamson on the policy standpoint, except for the things that are weird, like she doesn't have any political experience. Her claim to fame is writing a self-help book, which is something you do when you're thinking about starting a pyramid scheme. Now, let's be honest here. Marianne Williamson was a joke candidate. She was never going to break even 0%. And even in 2020, when she ran, she pulled at 0%. And that's where it ended up. She actually dropped out before Kamala Harris. So why would Kyle really thoroughly throw his hat in the ring behind her? Well, I mean, again, Biden just sucks that much, right? Well, there's other candidates like Robert F. Kennedy, who, well, we all saw how that went. I think we're still paying for that. And then we had that one guy called Dean, I think. I'm not even going to look up his name, but he also ran against Biden. He actually ended up doing the best against Biden in that not primary because he just ran away with it until it wasn't him anymore. Sorry if I spoiled anything. But look, to mount a serious primary to an incumbent president, you've got to stand on something. You need something to push you up there. And not only was she not elected to any role before, she has some very questionable history with some things that she said. She has this really weird opinion on antidepressants. She doesn't seem to like them too much. Oh yeah, she also used to be anti-vax. She isn't anymore, but you get why this would be a bit of a problem for someone trying to be the Democratic Party nominee. You could vet her on these things, but did Kyle ever mention any of these two things? Nope. No video on her saying about how antidepressants aren't that good. No video on her anti-vax history. That's crazy because Kyle would 100% make a video on something Joe Biden did that he doesn't stand on anymore 30 years ago. He'd make a video on things Pete Buttigieg did that he doesn't stand anymore. Hillary Clinton, believe it or not, she stopped supporting NAFTA after she became the nominee, of course, because she wanted to be president and nobody likes that. But Kyle still hammered her on that. So why would he not hammer her on being anti-vax or being antidepressant? It's just a strange thing, and this would certainly come back to haunt her in a general election. Instead, Kyle thought that she beat Donald Trump if she had been the nominee.
Biden is not the most electable Democrat in a general election against Trump or DeSantis. Marianne Williamson is definitely more electable.
Oh, and also I forgot to mention, he also thought she could be the next Bernie Sanders.
But the first poll that had her name in it, she was at 4%. Now, that's a very low number. Bernie Sanders, when he first launched in 2015, also started at 4%. Okay? So that's just to impress upon everybody that these things take time. They need to blossom. I love Bernie, but I think it's time for Marianne Williamson, if you ask me.
What? Yes, Kyle. Because Bernie Sanders is famous for his motivational books about how to feel good, playing with orbs, and being anti-vax. That's what Bernie Sanders is famous for. When I think feel the burn, that's exactly what I think, Kyle. Uh, but you want to know the funniest part of this? The craziest part of this entire thing. The craziest part is when I started to think to myself, when I started to think, how could Kyle possibly support someone who would have made how Kamala Harris ended up doing against Trump when all was said and done, like Reagan in '84? I started to think, why would Kyle be so passionately backing someone who was not a good candidate, who would have lost the general election? Let's see, could it be A, he's just this ignorant? B, he's driving engagement to his channel to keep pushing content like this and keep attracting an audience? Or could it be C, she officiated his wedding? Now, for legal reasons, I'm not gonna say that was the case. I'm not gonna say that's why he supported her. Maybe he actually just thought that playing with orbs is how you beat Trump. Maybe. So I'm not gonna go on this any further. And I guess we'll just have to wonder why he did it. If you want to know where he really started to come undone, the correct moment to point to would be July 21st, 2024. You see, when Biden ended up dropping out and Kamala became the new nominee, his coverage of the election and general politics from that point onward would take a really, really sharp turn in a direction I could have never thought possible. Now, in 2020, Kyle really hated Kamala Harris, and his reason for despising her was because he's a social democrat, and typically you're not a fan of neoliberalism. And she is, well, you guessed it, a neoliberal. So when it became her versus Trump, 2024, Kyle Kulinski essentially acted, well, super excited and started spamming what was essentially support tweets and saying stuff like she's gonna get 400 electoral votes. And, well, you think that's odd. When Republicans started criticizing it as undemocratic to swap her with Biden, which, by the way, it's not, because political parties are private organizations, which he knows and could make the argument. Instead, he told Mike Lee, one of the people who was saying this, that he looks like a thumb in response. Okay, don't get me wrong, he does look like a thumb, but Kyle Kulinski kind of doesn't have any room to tell anyone that they look like a thumb when at age 37 he decided one day, yeah, it's a good idea for me to bleach my hair. Yeah, I think you lose the right to criticize anyone on their physical appearance at that point. About a week or so after Biden dropped out, Kyle made a video on Trump's potential plan to steal the 2024 election. Now, by the way, that ended up aging really poorly. There was a lot of talks about Trump stealing the election, and I think Democrats focused on that a little bit more than, actually beating him. Jon Stewart actually had a good segment on this after all was said and done. I'll let him take it away for you. Towards the end of this video, Kyle started to get really angry about the hypocrisy on the right regarding flag burning and how Trump wants that outlawed, and if you burn a flag, you go to prison for a year or jail for a year. And he was really annoyed about that because that's free speech. And for the record, I agree with that as well. I think that burning the flag is a symbol of free expression. You may not like that, but that is free speech. And it's hypocritical of Trump or any Republican to say, oh, we're the free speech party, and then want people to go to jail for something that a conservative Supreme Court justice decided. That's free speech. You may not like it, but that's free speech. But that's always been Trump's stance. So Kyle getting extra mad here is a little odd, but he says something that is kind of telling and indicative as to where he was heading at that point. You see, because Kyle could not leave it at that. He had to take it one step further. And this is what he said.
Tired of coddling these dumbasses, bro. I'm tired of coddling them. There are no two sides to this.
The main reason why this is so out of place for Kyle is that a large part of his online presence on the left was winning over people who used to be sympathetic to Trump, supportive of Trump, or even voted for Trump before. And he seemed to understand that many of them had an anger at the establishment and status quo that they felt only Trump represented the counter of, which Kyle, as a Bernie supporter, could relate to. He's repeatedly said things like this in the past. But also, here's another interesting thing. Coddling? That's a strange way to look at things, from the outside looking in. It's not like he hasn't engaged aggressively with the right before. If, for any of you who don't know, he had a debate with Razorfist back in the day, and Razorfist, a right-wing libertarian YouTuber, got destroyed in that debate. I mean, it was a bad loss for him. He lost so much that if you even mention that debate to him on Twitter right now, he's gonna block you. He will, even if you say Kyle in his replies, he blocks you. So Kyle owned a right-winger. It's not like he was ever coddling these people. And furthermore, one of his best debates, in my opinion, his best debate moment, his best public appearance by far, was his 2019 debate with Charlie Kirk, in which that was not a civil debate at all. It got really heated, and I would never have thought, oh, that was coddling the right. No, he has his stances and he fights for them, but he's able to understand why people were supportive of Trump in particular. He never liked Republicans. He never liked the status quo. He never liked the neocons. For Kyle to say this is odd, even considering that he's also been critical of Trump for this exact same thing and was calling Trump a fascist as far back in 2016. Whether or not he believed it was, he flip-flops on that. I don't know how much Kyle really believes Trump is a fascist, but he has said many times, even in 2016, that he was. And even after Trump won, he made a segment criticizing Trump harshly and explaining why he was not good. It's a really good segment, and that was a huge Trump critique video. So the fact that he viewed any goodwill he earned from right-wing viewers as coddling in any way is interesting and inadvertently revealing about Kyle, and it really makes you start to wonder, was that always a fake impression? Did he never ever like the right in any way? Did he solely view people who were supportive of Trump but came to his audience as, no, I don't think I should, no, he didn't, no, come on, that's a stupid thing to, that's a crazy thing to consider. Why would I think that? Added to this, Kyle even started fawning over people like Pete Buttigieg, which, look, on its own, changing your mind on a politician is fine, but here's the kind of stuff that Kyle was saying about him in 2020, not long ago.
Pete is continuing to live up to the view of him that the left has. He's basically like the embodiment of the smug, coastal, liberal elitist. Okay, I'm going to make this as simple as possible, guys. Mayor Pete is a dishonest hack. The reality of Mayor Pete. Now, this is the same guy who's been going everywhere and saying, it's time for a new kind of politics. Tired of the old ways in Washington, D.C., and that's why I'm going to keep doing the old way to a T. He's acting the exact way that, old school politicians do, and he's adopting all of their bad habits. He's gone full bore on the corruption.
This type of hatred in 2020 and even after the 2020 election, to speak so positively of him in this regard, it kind of sounds like you have bipolar disorder. And, I mean, who knows at this point? Oh, yeah, and it gets even worse. When Donald Trump and Elon Musk had their gay little interview on Twitter Spaces, Kyle retweeted a Lincoln Project post. Lincoln Project is a group Kyle used to despise because they're a neocon group of former anti-Trump Republicans. What really made it accelerate, however, was Kamala Harris choosing Tim Walz as VP. Now, before I go further, I want to say I love Tim Walz. He's probably the best governor in the country, and if he was the governor of my state, it would be incredible. I don't agree with him on everything, but as far as being a good politician goes, he definitely meets the criteria. His record is phenomenal. Universal school meals, ensuring paid sick leave for workers, lowering prescription costs, and this is a really cool one, tax cuts for middle-class workers. Who doesn't love that? I think anyone on both sides can love Tim Walz. He's an amazing governor. But as a VP pick, you always have to vet, and Kamala Harris did this with both Tim Walz and Josh Shapiro, along with many other options, because VP picks, they are something that candidates put a lot of stock into. Do I think that VP picks in the grand scheme of things actually matter? No, and I've actually talked about this before. But I understand why a nominee, especially at this time, would consider a bunch of different things when it came to different VP picks. For obvious reasons, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, always seemed to be the one that Kamala and her team were leaning towards. Pennsylvania ended up being the tipping point state in the election, after all. But she chose to go with Tim Walz, which presented a likable running mate that would appeal to many. Republicans, they were mixed in response to him being picked. They knew that he was likable, and they knew that his economic record trumped theirs, no pun intended. But Josh Shapiro is the governor of the state that decided the 2024 election. So Tim Walz is a good pick, but had Kamala not picked him, well, that would just sound perfectly like Kamala Harris, but also I would understand this. But hey, Kyle got the VP pick he wanted. I got a VP pick that, had he been VP, that would have been nice, even though VP, they don't really do anything unless the president stops being president. Then they become the president. But all's right, right? Well, you see, here's the thing. Republicans were a little bit relieved that Josh Shapiro was not the VP pick and that it was Tim Walz. Because, again, that made Pennsylvania once again a state that they thought, well, maybe we have an edge in. And it makes sense. This is a country that does not elect by popular vote, but by electoral college. So when Kyle Kulinski saw the news that Republicans were a little bit relieved over the fact that the governor of Pennsylvania wasn't picked, what was the master political commentator's reaction to this? He laughed at it. Now, why would Kyle laugh at this? Well, because to him, Tim Walz was somehow so much better in every way than any data indicated. Even though his election as governor was a single-digit percentage victory, and even though Republicans would have a much easier time spinning the Harris-Walz ticket as far left compared to the Harris-Shapiro ticket, Kyle thought, despite Pennsylvania being the most important state of the election, that, oh no, Walz was just amazing enough to carry the victory. Does that sound familiar to anything we've known about Kyle in the past? Does that sound familiar? Man, that sounds familiar. You know, there was this one tweet of someone saying that, oh yeah, I think Tim Walz would get Democrats Ohio and Iowa. I wonder if Kyle agreed with this person when they tweeted that. I think Kyle would not only think this, I think he would add Missouri into that. I think that Kyle, with how optimistic he gets, would probably add Missouri into that. Hell, let's not stop at Missouri. Let's go to Arkansas, Louisiana. I mean, Tim Walz could do Reagan 84, but in blue. I mean, he could do that. I think he could do that. I think he could do that. Nothing shows that, but he has the record I like, so naturally the entire country likes Tim Walz. Here's one thing about the Kamala 2024 campaign that I had an issue with the very moment she launched. It's an issue that kind of never really stopped, even after they kind of course corrected. And it's that she ran on literally nothing. And nothing proved this to me more than me going to her campaign website a few days into her running and not finding a single policy section, but two sections asking for money. And this persisted until September 8th, halfway through the Trump-Kamala race. Now, on just so many levels, it's, again, this is something worth criticizing, and a lot of Democrats that were not named Kyle Kulinski did criticize this, but Kyle never made a single video about this. In 2020 and 2016, Kyle was more than happy to bash Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton for running on vibes against Trump, even though both of them had more policies on their website than Kamala Harris did. Why would Kyle be so willing to not cover this? I felt like I was living in an episode of The Twilight Zone. I mean, why? Why would Kyle not cover this? Is it because Tim Walz is the VP pick? It's because Tim Walz is the VP pick. That's why am I even asking that? Of course, it's because of that.
You can say definitively about pickled Russian lamprey.
What the heck? What is that?
I don't know. Let's see what it is.
What the heck?
Look at that.
This message is transmitted at the request of the United States Office of Civil Defense. It detected a long-range nuclear missile launch in North Korea. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of the Los Angeles metropolitan area. It is believed that it will impact this area within the next 1.5 to 2 hours. All residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately. Fallout is a product of nuclear attacks. Prolonged exposure to fallout will result in certain death. Fallout spreads across large areas approximately 1 minute.
Another thing that happened in the 2024 election was the Teamsters, for the first time since 1988, refused to endorse either one of the candidates. They had a lot of specific requirements for their endorsement that neither candidates were seemingly willing to bend on. So because of that, well, they basically sat it out. It should also be noticed that a majority of Teamsters members would have rather Trump had won. They initially mostly wanted Biden, but then when Kamala Harris became the nominee, it switched to being an overwhelming Trump support. And when Kyle found this out, he didn't really like this, of course, because, well, the Harris campaign was objectively more pro-union than Trump was. I mean, it's kind of obvious. Trump is like super anti-union. His record just shows it. But keep in mind, just a few months before this, Kyle endorsed Jill Stein over Joe Biden over the issue in Gaza. Now, he by endorsing a third-party candidate, you are not endorsing Biden, who was objectively more pro-union. He and Kamala were kind of the same on policy, Kyle, so what exactly made you change, and why are you suddenly, somehow when you do it, when you endorse a third-party candidate, or when you don't endorse one of the two, it's okay when you use your platform to do it, but when Teamsters use their platform to not endorse either of the candidates, suddenly they're frauds, they're just dumb, they're voting against their own interests. Well, your endorsement of Jill Stein was basically just helping Trump win. You walked it back, of course, and that's kind of curious that you walked it back at that one moment, the one moment. I mean, you cannot endorse Jill Stein publicly, and then when Teamsters do the same thing you did, suddenly they can't do it. That's not how that works. You can't have that standard. But of course, majestically, within the span of just a couple months, he just did a 180. It's also really gross to act as if you're using your principled stance against bombing Gazan children, and then effectively turn back on that once you get a candidate that you find aligns more with you politically, and suddenly your principles about not voting for an administration that's bombing Gazan children goes away. It's one thing to say that Trump is going to be worse for them, but that was also the case when it was Joe Biden, and Kyle Kulinski refused to endorse Joe Biden over Donald Trump. Was the plight of the Palestinian people just something Kyle could use for engagement as well? I mean, you wouldn't be so crazy for thinking it, considering the way he's been behaving the past year. Then, on September 14, 2024, Crystal Ball and JD Vance had a bit of a spat on Twitter regarding his really idiotic takes on the cats and dogs things from the debate. She critiqued his opinion and pointed out how it originated from a super fascistic online forum. He gave kind of a dumb response about how somehow this contradicted her hatred of neoliberalism. Okay, buddy. And then Kyle quote tweeted this with honestly a good response. Vance and Trump were idiots for spending a week propagating bullshit like this that was super dangerous, especially considering a college in Ohio had a literal bomb threat made because of this stuff that was being spread by both candidates. And the following Monday, he predictably does a segment of this on his show. All is good. His critique is correct. JD Vance was being a racist dumbass. So why am I bringing this up to critique Kyle? Well, let's see how Kyle initially begins this.
JD Vance goes to war with my wife. He picked a fight with my wife. Bad idea, dude. Bad idea, you pudgy-ass Pillsbury Doughboy bitch.
Okay, Will Smith. Okay. No one can argue with your wife online unless or else they're gonna be dealing with you. Okay, Kyle. I understand how it works. Okay. I found this to be odd at the time. Firstly, because what does her being your wife have anything to do with it? You've criticized married women before, Kyle. This is political discourse. Your wife is perfectly capable of fighting her own battles. I mean, she's been doing this for a long time, longer than you, and also she doesn't appear to have the same complications that you do with maintaining a consistent narrative, I would say. But okay, I shouldn't nitpick. Kyle is a wife guy. JD Vance is a piece of shit anyway. The world works, right? After all, can I really criticize a guy defending his wife? Of course not. And Kyle has some choice words too for people who don't defend their wives. One of them, again, being JD Vance, and another being Ted Cruz. If you don't know about Ted Cruz's wife, in 2016, when Trump was running against him in the GOP primary, Trump had some opinions on Heidi Cruz's appearance. Oh, this guy's a douchebag. Ted Cruz is forever going to have a gripe with Trump now.
Hi, this is Ted Cruz calling. I was calling to encourage you to come out and vote on Election Day. This election is critical for the direction of our country, and I urge you to come out and support freedom, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. You can vote by absentee ballot, and if you need help getting an application for an absentee ballot, the Republican Party of Texas can help you with that. Or you can vote in person. But I just wanted to encourage you to come out and vote. Thank you, and God bless you.
Oh, never mind, he's a diehard MAGA patriot. Awesome job, sir. I want to grow up to be a cuck like you. And Kyle made fun of him for this.
Ted Cruz was cucked by Donald Trump. Donald Trump argued that Ted Cruz's dad killed JFK. Donald Trump said that Ted Cruz's wife is effectively unfuckable. Donald Trump was vicious in the primary against Ted Cruz. And when Trump ended up winning, Ted Cruz went to the RNC and said, hey, vote your conscience. Me. Vote your conscience, me. And then Trump came after him, and the donor class told Ted Cruz, remember who you work for, bitch. And then he bent the knee. And he did phone banking for Donald Trump with that OD soy boy face. Like, so you got cucked by him. What you're describing is what happened to you, Ted.
And since becoming Trump's running mate, JD Vance has been criticized by a lot of racist people online because his wife is Indian. He's not going to take this lying down, is he? Oh, okay. Kyle has had a field day making fun of these losers. And it checks out. Because Kyle would never be cool with someone making fun of or attacking his own wife before, right? Because look at how mad he got at JD Vance. Well, you guessed it. Vosh, a political streamer, has literally insulted Crystal in a myriad of ways, calling her a fascist apologist, a coward, a weasel.
Crystal Ball is aptly named for the ancient artifact that was cursed, that hexed her entire family, leaving her unable to engage in any political analysis besides bashing Democrats. She sounds exactly like Ben Shapiro. I'm gonna kill myself. I actually can't believe this bitch. This is insane to me. Are you actually like CIA? Who are you, Crystal Ball? You're not a fucking progressive.
And look, I'm not going to criticize Vosh for these things a lot because if you look at the context, yes, his criticisms were valid, but these were kind of worse than anything JD Vance was saying to her. And how does Kyle take it? How does Kyle react to this guy attacking his wife? Oh yeah, he's all chummy with him. But look, let's forget about the wife part, okay? You see, one of the reasons Kyle supports Medicare for All is because his dad died of cancer, and he says that if Medicare for All existed, he would still be alive right now. And when he told this story, Destiny started attacking him and his dad for it.
My dad didn't have health insurance, so he went to the chiropractor instead of the doctor for back pain? I'm sorry, bro. Sounds like your dad was just a dumb fuck. I don't think this had anything to do with Medicare for All, bro. Chill. Yeah, guys, chill. His dad's already dead. It's not like I'm fucking offending him or whatever. Getting too personal? Dog, I'm sorry. If you go to a chiropractor, legitimately, you're fucking so stupid.
And how has Kyle responded to Destiny? Oh, look at that. All that fawning praise. Interesting. So he finds it cuckish when Ted Cruz and JD Vance don't defend their wives. But when his family is attacked by other people online, that's perfectly fine. It's kind of weird. It's like he just attacks people consistently for things he does himself. Interesting, Kyle. That's really interesting. But now that I think about it, this is a perfect opportunity since I'm thinking about Kyle, JD Vance, and Ted Cruz and how bad of a job they do defending their loved ones. I think the three of them should do a podcast. You've heard of LolCow Lives? Now get ready for LolCuck Live. I want to take a detour here, but don't worry, it's going to make sense. Kyle Kulinski used to be really, really, really good friends with Joe Rogan, who, of course, is the host of the most popular podcast in the world, for better or for worse. Joe Rogan and Kyle have had a great relationship since probably 2019, and Kyle has defended Rogan throughout the years during his horse dewormer stuff, during a lot of his more anti-vax leaning stuff, even at one point in 2020 when he indicated he would vote for Trump over Biden as after the primary wrapped up. And the two of them always got along, and Kyle, even when he didn't agree with what Joe Rogan was saying, Kyle would still be very amicable to Joe Rogan. And he would still be friendly and say, well, he's coming from a good place, he's just misunderstood. That all then started to change in 2024, and it aligns perfectly with Kyle's sudden majestic 180. And it all started when Joe Rogan began to become really friendly with Trump. And that bothered Kyle. So much so that Kyle started to attack Joe Rogan a lot. And it confused me a bit because, again, these two were friends. These two were in direct contact. Joe Rogan always referred to Kyle Kulinski whenever recommending people to get political information from. He always recommended Kyle. So what specifically was the issue? Now, Joe Rogan ended up endorsing Trump after doing his podcast interview with him in late October 2024, the same night that Beyonce didn't perform at Kamala Harris's rally. That was a very annoying Friday night. Both sides were just... But anyways, Kyle really did not like this. And at this moment, Kyle basically cut off Joe Rogan. He has since made fun of him. He's made video after video insulting Joe Rogan. Now, look, if you hate Joe Rogan, I don't really like him either. I would never go to him for information. I think he doesn't know anything about politics, and I would never take him seriously on anything. But Kyle was friends with him for 5 years after he was saying stuff about how horse dewormer had positives, even though that was bullshit and you can get someone killed. It really doesn't make too much sense. Like, why is Kyle suddenly so against Joe Rogan when just a year ago, literally just a few weeks before Joe Biden dropped out, Kyle had an appearance on his podcast for the 6th time, June 27, 2024. He was on his podcast being chummy with him, all friendly, and suddenly he just cuts him off? That's really interesting. Mind you, Kyle Kulinski defended Joe Rogan so much and at one point even bragged about the fact that he got Bernie Sanders to go on Joe Rogan's podcast.
My claim to fame in this whole thing is that I was the person who facilitated Bernie getting on Joe Rogan.
So, why was Kyle so okay with Joe Rogan being sympathetic to the right years ago, but suddenly now he's against it? Well, in 2020, when Rogan was indicating that he would vote for Biden over Trump, you have to remember this was coming off the heels of Bernie Sanders losing the primary. So, in Kyle's mind, he looked at this as an attempt to stick it to Biden because he was vindictive because Biden had won the primary, and probably because he viewed it as validation for his thought that, oh, well, a lot of Trump voters would have voted for Bernie, so we're on the same camp. Maybe that was his thought process. And now that Kamala Harris picks Tim Walz as her VP pick, and Kyle has become a huge foot soldier for this campaign at that point, well, now it's a little bit different. Now, if you have that same stance, I'm going to turn against you suddenly and act like, oh, I always knew you were full of shit, even though I defended you consistently. Like, I have more respect for the people who think Joe Rogan was always just pure right wing. I don't think he has any political beliefs because Joe Rogan he clearly doesn't know anything about politics. But I can respect more people who always were criticizing him. Hell, I don't like deplatforming, but I have more respect for people who were at the time saying boycott Spotify over him being on there. Because at least those people are consistent. Kyle, on the other hand, defends Joe Rogan. And I thought maybe it was because finally Kyle just was that petty that Joe Rogan wasn't endorsing Kamala for the reason that she picked a VP pick that really wouldn't have changed anything in her administration, regardless of whether or not we preferred her. I just thought, okay, maybe it's petty. Or maybe, could it be that he was only friendly with Joe Rogan because he had such a big podcast and was willing to have him on whenever and would give him an audience and give him more airtime and clout. And now, in the past couple of years, it seems his audience has grown and he might not need that anymore. And maybe there's a benefit to... You know, that intrusive thought that I've been having throughout the whole time recording this, it keeps getting more and more severe. I don't know why. But yeah, so that's interesting. And it's kind of odd. Like, he's criticizing Joe Rogan now, but he didn't have an issue with him for years and years and years. It's like, it's odd. You spoke about him like he was your friend. If this guy was actually someone you were friendly with, and if I were to trust you had any integrity personally whatsoever, why wouldn't you personally speak to the guy and tell him, hey, Trump is actually not good. Trump is actually really, really bad and has done all these terrible things, and he doesn't support working people, and he isn't anti-establishment at all. He has a bunch of billionaires. The richest man in the world is backing him. Joe, have Tim Walz come on your podcast, Joe. Hey, Joe, I know this good guy you can have on. Hey, Joe, can I talk to you about this? You know, if you're his friend, you could have that talk with him. But Kyle decided, let me not do that. Let me try to appeal to someone by apparently turning on him. I don't understand how people don't catch on to these things when Kyle does it. He makes it so obvious. I mean, this guy says so many things. Maybe you get lost in the sea of it, but you have to stop and think, wait, a few years ago, wasn't he saying this? Why is he saying this now? Why then? What was the friendship with Rogan? You can't act as if, oh, I can't believe I didn't know he was an idiot now. If Kyle isn't just being shady, he's fucking retarded and didn't realize Joe Rogan was clearly not sympathetic to anything the left would have supported. So now I'd like to talk about the climax of the 2024 election, which basically was just the 2024 election, which included Kyle Kulinski's wonderful 2024 election prediction. Now, before I get into how Kyle could have made a prediction like this, I think it's worth going over some history when it comes to both this and polling. If you've looked at election polling during the Trump era, you'll probably notice how much polls have tended to show Trump with less support than he would ultimately end up getting in each cycle. It's really no secret. Donald Trump's level of support by voters and the general public has been really hard for pollsters to catch. This has been dubbed the shy Trump voter by some political commentators. And it's what it sounds like. They support Trump and they voted for him, but they don't feel comfortable telling anyone for fear of how it'll be perceived. It's also been hard to capture what demographics these voters are likely to be a part of, though from what has been gathered, it seems likeliest that these voters are typically males age 18 to 45 that live in less Republican-friendly environments, be it a more urban or like an affluent suburban one where college degrees are more common. You get the picture. They likely support Trump, but they're scared of the stigma their peers may place on them if they voice it. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, you see, in 2016 and 2020, this very much was the case. Honestly, if you want the most interesting election that this factor happened, it was actually the one that Donald Trump lost. Because even though Biden won, the polls were more incorrect than they were when Hillary Clinton lost. Joe Biden was leading Trump by an average of 8 points in the popular vote, and he won it by 4 and barely overall by slim margins in the battlegrounds. Therefore, Trump being on the ballot equals, well, be ready for anything. He's truly one of a kind in this regard. But the 2022 midterms happened and tested a lot of people's abilities to hold on to believing in this. Well, you see, in 2022, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and that threw the election for kind of a loop. You see, Democrats got a big head after this because the polls were indicating a red wave or so was going to happen, or at least you would have gotten that by looking at the general macro levels of the polls. Republicans were never really leading by a big amount outside of a few outlier polls, but the ground still indicated that it was going to be red. So when Democrats didn't get destroyed like they were expecting, well, they came out of 2022 with a lot of optimism for 2024 and thought, okay, maybe the secret Trump or secret Republican vote myth is gone. They didn't care about the fact that midterms and elections are a little bit different because now they were hopeful. So for a year and a half leading up to the 2024 election, poll denialism was not coming from MAGA. It was coming from Democrats. They didn't view it as possible Trump could win. Not even Kyle Kulinski, who right off of 2022 immediately predicted DeSantis would be super competitive with Donald Trump and that Trump had virtually no chance to win a general election.
And I'm telling you, if it's a rematch of Biden versus Trump, which is definitely possible, if not likely, good luck to Don. I don't really mean that, but he's definitely the underdog. 3 elections in a row now, him or his candidates got obliterated. 2018, they got destroyed. 2020, they got destroyed. 2022, the worst destruction yet. His handpicked candidates got absolutely decimated. So anyway, if that's a sign of what's to come, man, he's in trouble. Okay, so in a general election, oh my God, again, he's just not the same guy he was. The era of Teflon Don is over. In fact, if anything, it's the era of like baby deer legs Trump.
This is honestly really weird to say as someone who's been covering Trump as long as you have. In 2016, Donald Trump was a super unlikable candidate. He was historically unpopular, and many people did not take him seriously and didn't think he should be president. To look at a poll like this and say that that automatically cuts him out is just insane, especially when you've got so long to go. But even then, it's Donald Trump. Most Americans do not have a favorable opinion of him. Even people who approve of his job as president don't like him as a person. Of course, they wouldn't want him to run again, but that's going to change as soon as we enter a general election environment. Kyle should be aware of this, but for some reason, he's allowing the wins of a midterm election to influence his commentary, which is one of the reasons why it tends to age so poorly. Again, This was when the 2024 election was 2 years away. You can't make definitive predictions about an election that's 2 years away. But suddenly, Biden actually started to present himself to be a problem when poll after poll showed Trump starting to overtake him, and then he kind of just clearly started leading. All this, by the way, was despite the guy literally getting arrested 4 times. If you're competitive against the guy who was arrested 4 times in 1 year, there is really something wrong. You should be ahead by double digits. And there was. But Democrats didn't address it because of the 2022 opium pills. And then, of course, came June 27th, and Democrats suddenly realized, this is a problem. Now, poll numbers improved for Democrats when it came to Kamala Harris instead of Joe Biden. But the improvement was, as Jon Stewart beautifully said, went from a certain Trump victory to a statistical tie. And that's how the race remained all the way through Election Day. So, how did Kyle Kulinski cover the polling? Well, to give you an idea of how Kyle covered it, his first video really talking about the polls were about a week after it became Trump versus Harris, and we got a few polls showing that Trump was down now or tied, and it was a 2 or 3 point difference. Now, here's the thing. When you're down 2 or 3 points, you basically think to yourself, okay, this is going to be a little tough. I'm not glad that I'm down, but I can still win, and this is still a race, so let me just keep being competitive and trying to improve. That's the mindset with any campaign. And when you're up 2 or 3, you think, okay, I need to maintain, I want to grow this lead. This is a close race after all. These polls are normal to be seeing. Nobody can be confident of anything. That's the mindset you should have with every election that's within this margin. I think it's normal, and you would be very irresponsible not to cover it in this way. In fact, Kyle Kulinski has often made fun of the mainstream media for their narrative humping, as he calls it, about polling and how elections are going to go. He's made fun of them. But ironically, in 2024, CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC all seem to be on the same page that, yes, this is a competitive election. For all of their flaws, they were relatively responsible in 2024 when talking about polls and how the election could go. But you know who wasn't responsible? Kyle Kulinski, because this was the first video he made talking about how the polls looked in the Trump-Harris election with 4 months to go before the election was held. Trump is fucked. Trump is done. The moment Trump lost the election, I could go on and on. It really shows a lot of hubris on Kyle's part about how arrogantly he just assumes that the election is going to go a certain way, and it all is clearly stemming from his personal biases. But don't worry, the best part of all of this is coming, because then came his beautiful, wonderful, super well-aged 2024 election prediction, which he uploaded on November 24, 2024, and then posted on Twitter again so confidently, giving his worst case scenario and his best case scenario. And both the best and worst case scenario involved Kamala Harris winning the election. So Kyle's logic is basically this. I know the polls show a tie. I know the swing state polls are close. I know that we just had 2 elections where Trump overshot the polls. I know that Kamala Harris is polling underwater in favorability right now, but nah, there's no way she could lose. And he's so smug about it, too. Like, he makes this prediction in such a way that he's almost implying you're an idiot to think that maybe, just maybe, a country with 330 million people doesn't think the same way he does. And he totally knows how they're gonna vote. He knows this. But why, perhaps, does Kyle bring himself to make such an overconfident, arrogant prediction, where he comes across not likable, but as a giant douchebag? Because, well, the 2022 midterm hopium kind of kicked this off, but mostly a theory that many married themselves to because they weren't seeing the bigger leads against Trump than they were used to. The pollsters were hurting! Okay, well, this may have been a sound theory, and honestly, I wouldn't put it past pollsters to do this to overcorrect in the Trump era, but that's not really how you do polling. What would be the point of doing polls if you're gonna herd? Sure, you can herd maybe a little bit, but the notion that they're all herding and making a close race, I mean, that's kind of not how you do polls. Pollsters ask people questions, they do scientific polling, and they get those results. Maybe they'll adjust by who's going to vote and how, and maybe they'll try to overcorrect, but, they don't even really need to do any of that, and they often don't, because there is something called a margin of error, which every poll has. You look at the poll, you see, okay, if, let's say, the race is a tie, but the margin of error is 3 points, what that means is you could have gone anywhere from a Trump +3 to a Kamala +3. You could have just looked at that. The notion that pollsters need to herd to look good is idiotic because they literally have that there because of the fact that, yes, polls can get it wrong. That's why it's called a margin of error. Error. That's a key word in that. And, if the polls are showing a close race, maybe that has to do with the fact that the fucking country is divided. I know, that's really shocking news. Trump won the popular vote by 1.5%. But no, not for Kyle, though. Trump is a shell of his former self. This is the worst campaign he's run. And apparently Kyle's logic of saying that Trump has lost his magic, which I can kind of agree with to a degree personally, but his logic is that he doesn't find Trump funny or charismatic because he's not making the funny tweets or tweets that he found funny in like the old days. Apparently that decides an election, funny tweets to Kyle, which just goes to show he makes fun of resist libs for always talking about Trump's social media posts and what he says, but apparently Kyle is now obsessing over what Donald Trump posts and what he says. Well, then I guess, ironically, the boomer libs are starting to have a little bit more integrity now, aren't they? It really struck me just how arrogant he was, and it was in part, if not primarily, fueled by him liking that Tim Walz was a running mate. Kyle liked this Democrat ticket way more than the last two. Like, way more. And because of that, he couldn't give an objective analysis. But want to hear something even crazier? Guess what? Once again, this isn't the first time he's done something like this. Remember, earlier this video we kicked it off by showing how he made a very similar prediction. Remember, in 2020, after Nevada, Kyle said that the race was now Bernie Sanders versus 1,991 delegates.
The question is he gonna be on pace for a plurality, or is he gonna be on pace for a majority? My guess is Bernie's gonna be on pace for a strong plurality.
Even though South Carolina was always going to be a tough hurdle because that was a key Biden state that you couldn't ignore, Kyle did in fact ignore this. He still, after not just Biden's giant South Carolina win, but after he immediately started to surge in the polls after that, he still clung on to the thought that Bernie had already won the primary, or at least a plurality of the delegates. And boy, he was wrong, gigantically. It's the same here. Kyle likes a candidate, and because of that, he refuses to, for even a moment, entertain the thought of, hey, what if the other person wins? He can't for even a moment accept that maybe what he likes isn't in tune with everyone else's likes. For all of Kamala's campaign flaws, at least behind the scenes, they were clearly aware of how close the race was going to be. Kyle's 2024 election prediction made him less in touch with reality than Democrat insiders, who are famous for not being in touch with reality. That's how they had Trump win in 2016. And he didn't even seem to let go of this prediction either. Just 1 hour before polls closed, the exit polls came out, And this is how Kyle posted.
With massively high turnout, again, this really does not bode well for Trump. Now that's all I got for you, but these are early exit poll numbers, and again, look, I would be the first one to come out here and say, hey, the data doesn't look good for Kamala or the Democrats, if the data didn't look good for Kamala or Democrats. But so far, everything I've seen is sort of on par with what my prediction video was the other day. What my low number for Kamala was, what my high number for Kamala was. I think the pollsters really screwed the pooch on this one, man.
You know, I really wish I could have been a fly on his wall, just looking at his reaction from start to finish that night. I mean, you have to think about Kyle's psychology at this moment. His wife was out doing a Breaking Points live stream, so he was home alone. He was alone, and on top of that, he was getting made fun of online. So he's alone in probably a dark room, has no one to console him as he's watching his embarrassingly wrong election prediction be mocked online. There's just, like, I can't imagine his psychological state after this. This is so, like... But this is what happens when you make an election prediction because you like a candidate. But what's crazy, the worst part of all of this is tomorrow you have to do a show. And you have to give your election take. Oh man. Just imagine. How much lower can Kyle Kulinski go? Well, it turns out this, interestingly, is where his downward spiral really began.
The National Primary EAS system has issued a National Emergency Action Notification for the continental United States. This station has interrupted its regular program at the request of the U.S. government to participate in the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test.
The following message is being delivered at the direction of the United States government. This is an attack warning. I repeat, this is an attack warning. An attack warning indicates that an attack on this country has been identified and that protective measures should be initiated.
I'm gonna be honest, after the election, no matter who won, I had a slight sliver of hope that Kyle was gonna make a comeback to a degree and become the version of himself that existed before 2022 once more, or at least somewhat. I was mostly gearing towards Kamala winning and immediately being disappointing, leading to criticisms from Kyle once more, but she didn't win, Trump did, and boy was I wrong about a lot more than I was expecting. I thought he would have made improvements to the content that he had been making up until that point, and maybe he would kind of realize, okay, maybe I did a little bit of miscalculating, and he would course correct from that. Quite honestly, I think that Kyle probably needed a few days off after the election, because, let's be honest, he probably didn't get much sleep that night, and he was definitely not ready to do a reassessment of the entire election, especially right after being wrong and just a few hours passing by. He needed a while to think and process, and he just didn't do that. And that sucks because I was kind of hoping maybe he would once again try to think, okay, let's get back to trying to make the case for the progressive left wing of the Democratic Party. That was my hope. Unfortunately, Kyle did make an election follow-up, and he did do an attempt at reevaluation, but it fell apart, and it was really bad. Like, this is probably one of his worst political analysis that he's ever done. I was beyond confused as to what exactly Kyle was trying to convey, and when I wasn't confused, I was dumbfounded at one particular moment that we're going to get into. First of all, his analysis of Trump winning just made zero sense.
All right, guys, welcome to the show. We got a lot to talk about. He did it again. He did it again. You also never have to listen to the polls again. I think we're watching the death of the polling industry at the moment.
No, actually, the polls were fine this time. There wasn't really much of a miss. And also, this is kind of ironic considering the fact that These are recent videos you've made where you're basically talking about polls. So, I mean, that kind of aged really poorly.
So, why did he win? Look, we're all taking stabs in the dark here, but for one thing, I'd say Trump is nothing but the master of branding. And Trump has branded himself as Trump equals success. And apparently that worked. As I pointed out before, I think people like the no filter and the arrogance. They think the arrogance is just confidence, and they think the no filter is honesty. So he picked up in like every demographic group, guys. Kamala underperformed Biden 2020, and Trump overperformed Trump 2020. The other thing is, people want the show. People want the show, and Trump delivers the show. He delivers charisma, he delivers controversy, and it looks like Americans are just obsessed with the entertainment value of this stuff, and they go, hey, that guy's never going to be a dull moment with that guy. Let's go in that direction. So they did. The other thing is, I think people want big change, and Trump is a revolutionary conservative. And I don't... Look, I don't know. It's possible America is just way more conservative than I thought, but what I think people will find out is, yeah, you want the revolution part, but you actually don't want the conservative part. And when he enacts a super conservative agenda, everybody will be like, oh, fuck, this sucks.
To say for months that he lost all his magic and was a shell of his former self, to now saying that this was his era and he was actually still charismatic and people wanted to have the show was a bit of a contradiction when you considered everything else he'd been saying up until that point. But then, Trump is a revolutionary conservative. What? I guess you could pass this as a good analysis, but again, it's beyond inconsistent with Kyle's 2024 election analysis so far, and also here's something he probably doesn't like to give credence to because it's an inconvenient fact, which is, why are you so sure the conservatism of Trump wasn't appealing? You realize Republicans make up half the electorate, right? And if you look at many of Trump's policy ideas during the election and how they were polling, they seem to be doing pretty well. It's definitely not just Kyle who thinks this, but I don't understand why he can't acknowledge that the country maybe isn't as left-leaning politically as he would like. There's a reason Kamala Harris had to tout the failed border bill during the campaign and not even once mentioned transgender people, because she didn't want to lose, and she knew that these were issues where Democrats were not in an advantage on. A failed attempt regardless, because again, she lost, but still, the point stands that even she knew where the country stood. For Kyle to act like the country hasn't clearly moved right in many ways in the last decade is just incredible. And again, it flies in the face of his belief that he's got his finger on the pulse. It wasn't just revolutionary conservatism or the show. It was a clear shift of American voters away from the Democratic Party. Part of it was inflation, the other part was social issues. It's just frustrating to see how much Kyle refuses to concede on anything that he finds favorable in his regard. It's just insane that Kyle can't say, hey, maybe I'm wrong about where the country stands on things, and maybe just because I don't like a certain candidate doesn't mean people don't like that candidate as well. But this wasn't the worst part of the video. The worst part came when he talked about Tim Walz. Without a doubt, we probably got the stupidest take from a political commentator following the election. And this is what Kyle said.
She picked a guy for her VP who would have done paid family leave and paid sick leave and free school breakfast and lunch for kids. That's what he did in Minnesota.
I'm going to be completely honest. When I heard Kyle say this, I had to listen to it like 5 more times to make sure that I wasn't hearing something I hadn't heard, because this is probably just the craziest take I've heard. Now, like Kyle Kulinski, I too have a degree in political science, and I don't remember literally everything, but one of the common requirements in poli-sci is you have to take an American government class, and you have to know the basics to pass. And I don't recall ever learning or having to answer this question correctly on a test where the vice president has the power to get laws passed. It literally isn't a thing because the vice president basically does nothing. So I guess there's 4 possibilities here. I mean, either Kyle cheated, he got lucky and passed despite not knowing the material. He actually does know how it works and purposely said this just to rile up his audience, who may or may not as well be versed of our government as he is. Or he genuinely was at that point delusional enough to believe that if Tim Walsh would be VP, we would have gotten those policies. So at this point, Kyle really just was letting it all go. He clearly had begun falling downward, and he was not going to slow down. And none of this was a clear indicator of this than on November 11, 2024, 6 days after the election, when Charlemagne the God made a statement saying that because Caitlyn Jenner voted for Donald Trump, it was okay to misgender her. And Kyle Kulinski responded to this tweet saying, correct. Okay, so I know that he was really angry, but at the time that I saw this tweet, that really was just beyond the pale. I mean, you don't condition your support for transgender people based on whether or not they did something you find morally acceptable. You support trans people and their gender identity because it would be transphobic not to. For Kyle Kulinski to say this is basically him saying, yeah, I condition my support for transgender people, which is ironic because this is something he accuses Republicans of doing, even though he'll become a Republican when he's mad, apparently. Honestly, though, I will say one thing that I do kind of want. I want a debate between Kyle Kulinski and Candace Owens because it would probably lead to a very particular funny moment where Kyle just crashes the hell out and, you know. I don't understand how this didn't receive more pushback. Like, barely anyone called this out. I thought he would have gotten backlash for this 100%, but no. It's genuinely baffling. Other leftists have gotten tarred and feathered for things not nearly as bad as saying, oh, I would misgender a trans person. Lindsay Ellis literally got insulted off Twitter for just saying Avatar: The Last Airbender and shows and movies like it should be considered their own subgenre. Like, one of the most inoffensive statements I could think of, and she was chased off of the internet because of this. Kyle Kulinski, on the other hand, basically says, yeah, I would misgender a trans person and it's perfectly fine, and nobody gives a shit. Then, about 2 weeks after the election ended, there was an episode of Piers Morgan that Kyle Kulinski was a guest on. Not until about halfway, though. In the first half, Cenk Uygur had a relatively hilarious debate moment with Professor Alan Lichtman, and if you don't know who he is, he's the one who established the famous model of 13 keys to the White House. If 6 or more keys are false, that indicates the incumbent party's candidate is going to lose. His model had been correct for arguably his entire career of using it, which spanned about 40 years. However, in November 2024, that streak ended when Kamala Harris lost, who he predicted she would win. Long story short, Cenk Uygur told Alan Lichtman he was wrong and he was right, and Lichtman got a little hot about it. And it ended with Cenk dangling keys in Alan Lichtman's face. A really memeable moment. I love this part. It was a funny debate and I was entertained by it. And Kyle Kulinski, being who he is, decided, I want to give my take on it because I have a show to run, and you gotta fill this stuff with a bunch of segments. So I'm gonna do a segment making fun of Alan Lichtman's crash out.
You know, no shade, I was wrong too. A lot of people were wrong about this. But now, having lost, having been dead wrong, but he's insisting like I wasn't wrong. Okay, now, like, any respect anybody has for this guy should be gone now. Bro, you have to be willing to hold an L. You have to be willing to be honest and say, I was wrong. Just hold the L. hold the L, and then do some introspection, try to realize why you were wrong, adjust your fucking shitty little keys, and move forward. Like, what are we doing here? Lichtman, man, just hang it up, dog. Retire. I don't know what to tell you. You do need to engage in some semblance of introspection. And by the way, part and parcel of that at a personal level is Alan Lichtman, hold your fucking L. Stop being a weasel. Don't say you weren't wrong. That's so stupid. Everybody knows you were wrong. Give it up.
Again, incredible lack of self-awareness considering Kyle has spent the last few weeks losing his marbles over being wrong about the election. But apparently he sees Alan Lichtman do it, and he can understand when that's a crash out. But when Kyle Kulinski does it, oh, it's okay. I guess he just doesn't apply standards to himself that he applies to other people, which I guess at this point is not super shocking to see. What an amazing lecture to give anyone after how you've been acting. Say what you will about Professor Lichtman, he was literally using a model that had been arguably right 10 times before getting one election wrong. Kyle's 2024 election prediction was based on his personal biases and what he wanted to see happen. He left absolutely no room for a chance Trump could win, solely because he thought he lacked appeal to voters and naturally what he thinks goes. And also, again, this is coming just a few days off where Kyle basically said he would condition his respect for transgender people in response to the 2024 election. Unless I've missed it, Alan Lichtman didn't ever say something like this. And I don't think he's ever said anything close to this. Telling someone to calm down and hold an L after you are very clearly not holding your own L is like pot calling the kettle black is not enough for this. Now on to the next phase of his spiral. If you've been watching Kyle or following his Twitter or just unfortunate enough to see his tweets on your timeline following the election, you would know that Kyle has picked up a very interesting obsession. And it's with one Elon Musk, the guy who has 14 kids and all of them hate him. Okay, fair. Elon is a bad guy who seems to like doing a few interesting things in front of large crowds that, really he should not be doing. Kyle Kulinski really doesn't like Elon Musk. Like many, Kyle believes Elon being unelected yet having so much control over our government at the moment is a big issue. And also, he's just evil. Like, he's really, really evil. But like with so many other issues, Kyle cannot let up. He just can't. He has to be Kyle. If you try scrolling through his Twitter, you probably are going to have a hard time getting as far back to a few weeks because he's just spamming memes. And what's even more interesting is Kyle began to think that Elon Musk was fighting with him as well because he responded at a tweet he saw of Kyle that was posted by a right-winger. And Kyle thought to himself, I've started a war.
Well, y'all. What do we have here? Did a robber baron just decide to come after me, Crystal? Is that what happened?
I think an immigrant welfare queen, robber baron, actually.
Immigrant welfare queen, robber baron, decide to come after me. Your lovely husband.
That is my understanding of the situation.
Elon, you know you done fucked up, right? You know you done fucked up. You're supposed to pretend like people like me don't exist. All you're gonna do is boost my name, you fool! Why would you do this to yourself? Why would you do this to yourself?
If Elon Musk had any shame, he would never show his face again. And that standard also applies for you, Kyle. But would you like to hear how this gets kind of sad? I kid you not. On Christmas Eve, I open Twitter. Mistake, I know. And I find Kyle Kulinski posting a meme about Elon Musk. And I think he posted multiple that day. On Christmas Eve, Kyle Kulinski is married and has kids. and he's decided to spend his Christmas Eve spamming memes about Elon Musk. Dude, go hang out with your wife and family. Spend time with them. God, I'm imagining them taking pictures on Christmas, and Crystal is trying to tell Kyle, "Hey, Kyle, can you get over here, sweetie? Come on, we gotta take pictures for Christmas dinner." And then Kyle's just sitting there on his phone, wiping gravy off his cheek and being like, "No, I gotta make fun of Elon Musk. I gotta own him. I gotta show the world he's bad." What are you doing? What are you doing? Like, this is so insane. What is this obsession? I understand Elon Musk sucks, but Kyle, who couldn't even influence the 2020 Democratic primary, apparently seems to have enough of an ego to think he's interesting enough to Elon to get banned off Twitter because he's spam posting about him, the thing that no one else outside of Kyle does. And that he's gonna, like, what? You think you're gonna shift public opinion? You're not gonna do that. You're especially not gonna do that now because the past few months, you've come across as an unlikable piece of shit. When Kyle tries to do commentary in the midst of this, and especially following the election, when he just tried to unwind and not give his harsh opinions on things and try to give more cool analysis like he was able to do years ago, he just doesn't sound as happy about it. He sounds tired. He sounds frustrated. He sounds like he doesn't even enjoy doing this sometimes. I mean, look at the videos he posted before Thanksgiving. Listen to how he sounds describing what he's talking about.
We now have our official first polls for 2028 for the presidential race. I mean, these people must have fired that machine up literally the day after the election to ask people who they want. So, this is a bit of a silly, giggly kind of segment here because who cares what the polls are showing this far out? I mean, things are subject to change massively, but nonetheless, I still want to talk about it. So, is an Emerson poll legit? Legit outlet. Look at this. So this is on the Democratic side. Number one by 30 points. 30 is Kamala Harris. 37%. Number two is Newsom at 7%. Then you have Pete Buttigieg at 4%. Gretchen Whitmer at 3%. Shapiro at 3%. Michelle Obama at 2%. And Bernie clocked in at 2%. So now I think there was one other. I couldn't find it.
I mean, just listen to Kyle's commentary from years ago and how much more energy was in that.
So Ted Cruz dropped out of the race last night, and it's time for me to say, I told you so. There's something about him that just does not work. There's something about him that the American people go, that smells weird, man. I gotta stay away from that. And as bad as it is that Donald Trump is now the presumptive Republican nominee, let's actually take a second to bask in the fact that Ted Cruz is gone, because Ted Cruz really and truly represents an old school style of Republican that would have been a threat way back in the day. Because he is worse. He is worse. And this is what I'm trying to say, is that Ted Cruz, basically what he is the Rick Santorum of this election cycle. You got to call it what it is, man. So in Iowa, for example, he won there. I predicted he was going to win in Iowa, even though Trump was up in the polls. Why? Because Iowa has a track record of picking silly people. One year they voted for Rick Santorum. Another year they voted for Mike Huckabee. So they go for the theocrats. The states where Ted Cruz won are just super rural, desolate, uber-religious states. And then even towards the end here, it got to the point where even in those states he couldn't win. Like Indiana was supposed to be one where demographically favors him. He couldn't win.
You can clearly see the difference between Kyle's commentary back then and Kyle's commentary now. I mean, he clearly is doing this somewhat rageful, but he also just doesn't even sound as interested as he used to. Added to this clear lack of energy and loss of interest in what he's been doing, I also feel he's trying to force himself to appear to be a more resist lib friendly commentator, and it was, there's a lot of examples of this, but a clear one I want to show is in early 2020, a few weeks before Trump took office again, and a Republican didn't shake hands with Kamala Harris. Now, mind you, this guy was in crutches. He couldn't really move much. Kamala seemed like she was willing to shake his hand, but again, that movement, there was just a lot to it. You could either think maybe this guy was an asshole and he didn't want to shake her hands when being sworn in because he was like, oh, you're the VP, you lost, and I hate you, you're a Democrat, I'm Republican. Okay, that's entirely possible. But again, guy was in crutches, Kamala was a few feet away from him. We got to get a move on with this. Let's just evade it. We're adults. It's thank you for swearing me in, or on Kamala's end, well, you're free to go. I see you're in crutches. We don't have to shake hands. That's fine. I don't know, because there wasn't a camera at that area, which no one wanted to address. And also, who gives a shit, man? Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? Why did this go viral? But forget about it going viral. Let's see how Kyle Kulinski covers this. But before I get into that, reminder: Kyle Kulinski likes to brag about how he's politically incorrect, and he's mocked boomer liberals for caring so much about civility and decorum. So let's see his video about this. Oh, that's the thumbnail. Okay. So, wow. I mean, it's actually embarrassing that Kyle would even comment on this. But again, money is money. He's making a lot of money off this. That's one thing you can definitely say. It's just, this did not need to be something you covered in a video, and also to say classless. It's like, dude, you are not trying to make this case. This is not who you are. You are very clearly trying to appeal to some people with this. You do not give two shits about this, and you don't give two shits about this. So why are you saying, like, why would you voice your opinion on this? Oh, wait, I answered that question. I'm trying to rationalize Kyle. That's crazy. But hey, while we're on the topic of, not holding your principles for some reason, let's talk about a certain subject that has become a little bit more relevant with Trump taking office. It's been relevant for years, but it's gotten a little bit crazy since Trump took office, which is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So, of course, you already know what happened. Vladimir Putin illegally declared war on Ukraine for no reason, and they've been at war for over 3 years now since then. Now, when this happened, Joe Biden immediately came to Ukraine's support. We've been giving them military aid, we've been helping them out, and thanks to the world coming together in many regards, Ukraine is actually putting up a good front against the country that at one point was the second most powerful country in the world. So you got to give them props for that. It's been a hard war, but Ukraine is being given defense. We're standing by Ukraine, and it's provided positive results. Ukraine has gotten a lot of assistance, which I think is good. But someone who had a few reservations about this? Kyle Kulinski. Kyle Kulinski was a little bit critical of Joe Biden for consistently giving Ukraine aid. And this went on for months. Kyle's stance is that the first few packages to Ukraine, he would have voted for it, but after that, he would have stopped. That's basically his stance. He criticizes us giving funding to Ukraine.
Well, on the one hand, I can't say I'm surprised, because that would be naive as hell. But on the other hand, at some point, it has to get surprising, right? Biden to send another $1 billion in military aid to Ukraine. President Joe Biden announced another $1 billion in weapons for Ukraine on Wednesday following a call with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. The latest security package, the 12th such installment. 12th. Look at this. That means $54 billion to Ukraine in less than 4 months. So I have no problem sending them weapons to defend themselves. I'm perfectly fine with that. We've clearly reached the point where it's not just about them defending themselves. And I get it. Look, I was in favor of that first aid package to Ukraine, but I understood, like, yeah, you know, they should have a right to defend themselves, etc., etc. But now we're on the 4th or 5th or something package funding Ukraine and arming Ukraine, and we have the baby formula shortage here. And, like, by the way, like, every Democrat voted for the package.
And also, he took joy at a time when Joe Biden told Zelensky, hey, be a little grateful that we're giving you this aid. I know you're a little frustrated that maybe it's not coming as fast as possible, but you should be grateful. And Kyle said this.
This is based. It is kind of obnoxious, right? Like, hey, we're giving you another $1 billion in military assistance. All right, so here's what else I need. Bitch, what? Could you imagine you're helping your friend out, you give your friend $100, and they're like, all right, so I'm going to need like 200 more. Wait, what? Shouldn't you be thanking me for this 100 I'm giving you? And remember, this is at the same time that, how many crises do we have building up in this country? Here, take $1 billion for a war that you're fighting. Okay, so the priorities here. But it looks like Biden, this is something swirling around in Biden's head to the extent anything is, right? What are we on, package number 17? Something like that now? These guys are probably besties at this point. And so Biden had to put his punk ass in check.
Wow. I don't think Kyle was a big fan of Zelensky, if we're being completely honest. So what does Kyle Kulinski think now that Donald Trump is president? Well, in late February, Trump had Zelensky in his office, and they had a very civil meeting, if you guys remember that. Oh man, that was... But what did Kyle Kulinski think about it? Oh, let's see. Interesting. So before, Zelensky was ungrateful, but now, after you get hundreds of thousands to probably 1 million at this point resist lib followers, now majestically, Slava Ukraini! I have always been pro-Ukraine. I don't know if I mispronounced that. I'm sorry if I did. Jesus. Oh, I've always been pro-Ukraine, guys. Oh, my poor Zelensky. Poor guy, poor baby. Oh, I feel so bad for Zelensky, who I was just making fun of a few years ago. Oh, he's caught between a colonizer and another colonizer. Oh my God, guys. Oh man, my paycheck is gonna be too fat the next time it comes in. Oh. Kyle Kulinski's coverage of the Russia-Ukraine war is slightly better than Hassan Piker's coverage of the Russia-Ukraine war. Which really doesn't say too much. He clearly didn't have any idea what he was talking about before. He clearly had the stance that Russia wasn't even gonna attack Ukraine. And now he's just giving aggressive takes you'd hear on MSNBC. But up until now, honestly, every single thing that we've gone over with Kyle are, if not kind of a problem and shady, are things that maybe you would expect from a YouTuber, especially after they grow an audience. Audience capture is real. That's just the case. Audience capture is a thing. It's very hard for people to break away from their audience. That's entirely fine. Well, it's not fine, but I won't completely view someone as irredeemable just for becoming somewhat captured by their audience. I don't think anything up until now has been just beyond the pale to the point where I think Kyle has just gone too far and is just unforgivable. But unfortunately, when Kyle started to lose himself and just spiraled after getting the 2024 election dead wrong, it was a fast fall, and eventually he finally crossed the line. So a few days after the election, Kyle made a video saying, "Let the election-denying liberals cook." They watched for 4 years as Republicans lied shamelessly about the 2020 election and paid zero political price for it. There may have even been an electoral benefit. Give me a bunch of rabid foaming at the mouth liberals hell-bent on. So first of all, this is a terrible idea. Election denialism is bad. Donald Trump being a baby over losing in 2020, especially when he should have been grateful he didn't lose by more after everything he did in 2020, was just abysmal and really scary, considering that we are supposed to be the shining star of the hill of democracy, you know? To erode trust in democracy is bad. And in a perfect world, it would have been disqualifying. Second of all, no political price, no electoral benefit. I mean, it's either Kyle has short-term memory, which I'm not so sure if this can do that yet. I know weed can do that. I don't think nicotine can do that, but maybe. I mean, I don't know. If you wondered why in 2022 Republicans failed to have a red wave, even as Joe Biden was massively unpopular, it wasn't just Roe v. Wade getting overturned. It was also that many Republicans denied the 2020 election results, and they lost, sometimes by a lot. Take Doug Mastriano, for instance. The guy denied the 2020 election, and he lost by double digits in Pennsylvania. Republican candidate for governor in Wisconsin, Tim Michels, said the week before the election that if he won, Republicans would never lose in Wisconsin again. He all but indirectly threatened to basically push measures to rig the scales for Republicans. And guess what? He lost by a noticeable amount, even as the Republican Senate candidate Ron Johnson won. Furthermore, Republican Governor Brian Kemp stood up to Trump as he tried to beg him in 2020 to find votes to win the state or cancel enough votes to make Biden lose it. He said no. He firmly stood against election denialism, and then in 2022, Trump's endorsed primary candidate to Kemp lost handedly, and then Kemp was reelected by a decent margin, while Herschel Walker lost his Senate race. And in the House, many Republican election deniers lost. Vox actually has a really good video that I recommend you check out. It's this one. They cover this quite thoroughly. It's hilarious to see how much the guy did mental gymnastics around this. For Kyle to insinuate that election denialism proved to be electorally beneficial is just absurd. If Democrats took advice from Kyle on this, this would all but certainly backfire. But hey, maybe Kyle's mad. You know, he wanted Tim Walz to be VP. He's blowing off steam. Okay. You know, this is getting too much. But again, people are at emotional lows sometimes. He'll calm down with this. Right? Right? On January 28, 2025, Kyle did a segment that for me was the final nail in the coffin. You see, the week prior, some random guy who's a statistics professor went on the Thom Hartman program to say that he'd done some number crunching and found that actually Kamala Harris won the election, but voter suppression prevented her from winning. Now, let's do some analysis of what this guy said.
And GregPalace.com is your website. Hey, Greg.
Hey, glad to be with you, Tom.
Well, thank you. So who won or who lost the election?
It's real simple. If not for vote suppression tactics, that's a fancy word for shafting people of color out of their vote, young people out of their vote, Kamala Harris would have won 3,565,000 votes. That's a number of voters that were denied the right to vote because they were purged or they were challenged or they had their provisional ballot thrown out. So we had, are you ready for this? According to the Elections Assistance Commission, the official numbers, we had 4,776,706 voters purged from the voter rolls wrongly. And I'm not making this up. I had the guys from that work with the Microsoft and Amazon go through every single purge name in 2 states, Georgia and Wisconsin. We took those 2 states. And we found, for example, in Georgia, that 198,000 voters, we actually have their names and addresses were wrongly removed from the voter rolls. And you'll be shocked, overwhelmingly, voters of color. And in Wisconsin, almost every voter removed by the purge was either a black voter in Milwaukee or a student in Madison. We're talking, there's some double counting here. The vote suppression factor is about 2.3%. Again, Kamala Harris would have even won the popular vote, 3.565 million extra votes. She would have won the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. These are pretty exacting calculations, Tom. And so she would have won with 286 electoral votes. Again, this is absent if we didn't have a vote suppression Jim Crow voting system. And I'm telling you, I work all over the world on elections, from Britain to Venezuela to Liberia. There's no other nation in the world except for old apartheid South Africa. I mean, where we have a supposed democracies.
Young people and minorities. A full 3.6 million votes. Didn't have their votes counted, and if they had, Kamala Harris would have won just enough votes to barely win with 286 electoral votes. So first question, how do you know they all voted for Kamala Harris? Votes are secret. You literally can't find who someone voted for. There's no actual way that you can prove that unless you were behind them at the ballot box and took a picture. And I don't think you could do that 3.6 million times in the span of a few weeks. And also, around 20% or so of those votes had to go to Trump, right? I mean, maybe even more, considering the inroads he'd made with young men and even minorities in 2024. Also, really? 286 electoral votes. So you're telling me that Kamala Harris won in probably the most dramatically close way possible? Like, this literally just gives her enough votes to win. Really? So she just did just well enough to win. Wow, what are the odds? You can easily tell this guy is in the bargaining stage of grief with this. Look at his social media. He clearly wanted Trump to lose, which, hey, understandable, but couldn't accept the reality is often disappointing, as Thanos says. And also, unlike Thanos, he tries to make reality be whatever he wants it to be. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the reality stone. But to Kyle, he didn't take issue with anything this guy was saying. He didn't take issue with the fact that he was kind of just making statistical assumptions in his head that kind of were used as a copium method. He didn't take the fact that this guy was super biased against Trump, and any research he probably could have found if he was doing serious data that would have been favorable to Trump, he would have discounted. For him, he didn't even do criticism. No criticism whatsoever. His video is titled Breaking: Kamala robbed of 3.6 million votes. In this video, Kyle doesn't even attempt to engage with this election denialism in a neutral way, or a way that does some room for criticism, some margin for error. You know, remember that, Kyle.
Look, keep it real. Some things just didn't smell right. I mean, I don't know what you guys think of it, but I'll tell you straight up, of Trump's 3 campaigns, 2016, 2020, and 2024, in my estimation, the 2024 campaign was the single worst of all of them. Now, at the same time, Kamala came out of the gates hot. People don't remember that early period where she had a little honeymoon phase there. She came out hot. You guys remember when I did my predictions? What did I say was the floor for Kamala Harris? The least I could see her winning. I believe the exact number was 286 electoral votes. According to investigative journalist Greg Palast, that's exactly what you got. Why are we the only ones talking about this? Why is Tom Hartman and Greg Palast, why are they the only ones doing the Lord's work? Look, I think I know the answer, right? I think I know the answer. The answer is people on the Democratic side, liberals, leftists, and Democrats, they feel like, well, look, we went after the right for their election denialism, for years, rightly so. And so now, if we start saying these things, then we're going to look like hypocrites. But here's the thing, y'all. They were lying about Trump winning. He didn't win. They're wrong. When we talk about this, it's real.
He just takes what he says at face value and says that, unlike MAGA denying the 2020 election, this is real. This is true. What MAGA said is false. What we said, because we like our candidates, this is good. No, Kyle. It's not true. It's not true. It's an old guy refusing to accept reality. A guy who looks like he needs a little bit more sleep. I should know. MAGA idiots were doing similar things to this in 2020, such as this dumbass documentary, which made 0 points. And what was even more concerning about this? This has almost 700,000 views. This video is a relatively good performing video for Kyle Kulinski on an average day. This garbage propagating a conspiracy theory with absurd logic that is clearly being done by someone who is way too biased to be doing a neutral look at this has 2/3 of a million views and 53,000 likes. Also, it's kind of ironic for Kyle to start doing this when on election night he tweets, Dems are going to look in the mirror, take a deep breath, and tell themselves, we gotta be more fascist. So you say this, thinking Democrats are going to become more fascist. And then you do election denialism, which is kind of a way that fascists historically get started. Yeah, well, someone probably did look in the mirror, but maybe it wasn't Democrats. Kamala Harris and Democrats accepted the election results and conceded. And up until this point, they've been pretty bad at managing themselves, but at least they haven't gone in this direction. Hell, they literally oppose an attempted deportation on a pro-Palestinian student activist, something that doesn't exactly line up with we gotta be more fascist. And then there's Kyle doing election denialism. Again, this really was the tipping point for Kyle, where I realized, yeah, he's not going to come back from this, and it kind of really cracked open thoughts that I didn't want to start thinking, because I really don't want to see the worst in someone who I'm a little embarrassed to admit I've looked up to for a long time. Someone who I've thought is really intelligent, is really good at analyzing politics, is really good at moving people in the right direction in politics. The thoughts that, Kyle spends a lot of time these days making content like this. And while you never know how much someone is making off their content on YouTube, is it really a far-fetched theory to think Kyle is at least primarily making content like this because it's getting him traffic and ad revenue money? And it's not just this. His Elon spamming has also generated a lot of traffic on Twitter, which pays verified users. Kyle sees what's getting him views and ad revenue. He's been doing this for a long time. He knows what drives engagement to his channel, and he knows what isn't. If you look at his statistics 2023 to now, you'll notice he had relatively high peaks. And in both these, he seemed to lean heavily into what was working. Now it's abundantly clear that his consistent movement toward basically being a resist generic commentator like Brian Tyler Cohen or people like him is really paying dividends. And it's made me question, was Kyle ever really in this to make the world a better place? Or was I, people like me, solely video clicks and engagement to him? Are the people he's attracted now the exact same thing? I mean, who else has had such a shift in this direction? I've looked for any, and honestly, they're all kind of the same as they were a few years ago. I mean, even if someone as a political commentator has not been as good as they once were, I mean, you don't really see a change like this happen in such a short amount of time. I can't really think of much anyone, or at least I couldn't. until I did think of someone. There is one other person that has had a very similar shift like Kyle Kulinski. Someone like Kyle Kulinski who suddenly, as soon as it became convenient, made what was basically a 180 on how they'd been doing commentary beforehand. There's only one other person I can think of like this, and his name is Dave Rubin.
Looking at me like, okay, we're ready for comedy. We'll do some comedic things. All right. We have a tremendous show for you. We got gays, we got lesbians, we got straights. Right up front, they put the straight person up front. Why would you put a straight person? I demanded the straight people be in the back. How many of you would say that you're conservatives? By a round of applause. How many conservatives? Conservatives always very respectful. You first raise your hand before you applaud. We don't make a lot of noise. Conservative, we're conserving the applause. Conservatives, that's good. Look.
Dave Rubin is a very interesting political character. He used to be very progressive and was actually at the Young Turks until disagreements over Israel-Palestine primarily, and he ended up falling out with the network and gradually shifted to the right. A lot of this was in part due to him realizing that it would be very beneficial to him, clout-wise and financially, to, of course, become a right-wing grifter. Now, Kyle Kulinski often likes to make fun of Dave Rubin, which I find pretty interesting considering, like Dave Rubin, Kyle Kulinski has had a similar record. He had a hugely, widely populist progressive view, and this was what his content was, and this was what he talked about for years and years until he had a falling out with the Young Turks and Jimmy Dore, and suddenly he began to shift. Not in a conservative direction like Dave Rubin, but very clearly in a more resist-lib kind of way. And like Dave Rubin, you can clearly tell that he's hamming it up and kind of is just saying these things for clout, and you wonder if these are his actual beliefs. You know, Kyle Kulinski and Dave Rubin, it's 2025. Equality. I think these two ideally would make a beautiful married couple. And in a video he made in August 2024, where ironically he was making fun of his bad predictions, again, huge lack of self-awareness from Kyle, he had this to say.
Look, I'll just say it plainly. If I had this track record that you're about to see, I would have been retired.
Well, Kyle, if the last 2 hours are indicators of anything, that retirement should be coming pretty soon, I guess. As we've now reached the halfway mark of 2025, Kyle Kulinski has not improved. In fact, he's gotten somehow worse. His content is basically just clickbait at this point, where he's really just harping on anything that will get him views, and honestly, it's worked, which is concerning. And in general, he's way more psychotic now, and he's also more unhinged to the point where he's just saying things that are either ridiculous lies or potentially at risk of kind of finding him getting in legal trouble. In March, Kyle made a video speculating on the idea that Trump will declare martial law on April 20th. And this was based on nothing much really, other than an odd headline that he saw, which was just baseless and just going off of a deadline he had in an executive order. And guess what? It didn't happen. But that didn't stop him from tweeting about this video a few days before that day, and the video itself has over 1 million views. So he lied and put many people potentially in a panic, basically just so he could get 1 million views. So martial law didn't happen, but Kyle Kulinski got paid. If spreading misinformation for 1 million views isn't bad enough, he also tweeted this to a congresswoman. Yeah, this is self-explanatory. So he tweeted that thing about Jenner in November, and I guess I guess this will just go down in another tabulation of Kyle saying, like, really problematic things that other leftists, again, have been chased off the internet for when it was like 10% of this. Sprinkle in stuff like him saying that Trump's approval rating is at 37% when there is no single poll at this time that has shown his approval rating at 37% at this point. Not one, yet Kyle tweeted this. And of course, another crazy thing is this, which I can't even read here because I don't know how that would go with YouTube's community guidelines, but it's pretty bad. And if Kyle Kulinski had received a knock on his door from the Secret Service or the FBI because of this, I would not have been surprised whatsoever. This is just insane behavior by Kyle Kulinski this year, and it seems like this was building up for a long time. It's just kind of wild that nobody seems to be willing to point this out. I mean, this is just insane. This is just insane. He's saying stuff that could incite rabid behavior by people listening to his content, engaging in his content, or believing his content. I mean, how much further down this hole is he gonna go?
Hello YouTube. In honor of my first video, I figured I'd go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about what I'm about and about what the site is going to be about. My name is Kyle. I'm 20 years old. I live in New York. I'm a political science major in college. I'm in my sophomore year, coming to the end of my sophomore year. And I can safely say that I'm pretty concerned about the direction the country is going in. Not just, I'm sure it's not just me. I'm sure a lot of you guys out there listening to this are concerned about the direction the country is going in.
The reason why I made this video is to show that he isn't the grand political commentator he makes himself out to be, and he isn't as filled with integrity and sharp analysis as he boasts. Kyle Kulinski is someone who for years advocated for pushing progressive populism in the Democratic Party, only to slowly walk it back following a spat between him and his friends in 2021. Kyle Kulinski is someone who will cherry-pick data to argue convenient realities or sometimes deny it altogether because the truth makes him uncomfortable.
This movement is fighting for Medicare for all. 70% of Americans want Medicare for all.
Someone who will have questionable reasons for aligning with causes and individuals. Someone who will be your friend only when it's beneficial to his online presence, and then instantly turn around and attack you, smearing you to his audience the moment he finds there's more to gain from being your enemy. Someone who mocks other people when they don't defend their loved ones.
Ted Cruz was cucked by Donald Trump. Donald Trump argued that Ted Cruz's dad killed JFK. Donald Trump said that Ted Cruz's wife is effectively unfuckable.
Then will turn around and be spinelessly friendly with people that attack his own wife and even his late father. Someone who has enough hate and vitriol to unironically say he would condition his support of marginalized groups if they get on his bad side. Someone who will maliciously spread election denialism if he's angry enough about a candidate he likes not winning, with not even any room for ambiguity that he's doing the denialism. Someone who will just lie about things that can be easily disproven with a simple Google search. Someone who will callously encourage reckless behavior. And someone who has no problem going as low as to spread panics so long as he gets 1 million views. This is who he seems to be, and this is who he's proud of being. He clearly has no regard for how he comes across. And what's worse, he faces little accountability, at least not until this all backfires on him. Kyle Kulinski is not someone anyone should trust, not as a creator and not as a viewer.
You probably want to subscribe to me. I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to me. If you're a Democrat, if you're a liberal, progressive, secular, whatever you want to call yourself, if you're on the left, please, 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 please subscribe.
came. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."